Hello and welcome to Scribes and Songsters. I'm Veronique Mandel. This week, our guest is Darrow Woods. Darrow is an author who recently released his first novel titled The Book of Answers, which was shortlisted for a Crime Writers of Canada award. The Book of Answers is a murder mystery that takes place in Oakville, Ontario, and the protagonist of the story is a United Church minister who discovers a body hidden behind one of the church walls. It just so happens that our guest author today is also a United Church minister who used to live in Oakville, but now resides in Kingsville and is presently a minister at Harrow United Church. Welcome to Scribes and Songsters.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So before we start to talk about your book, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, you covered a little bit of it.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Northern Ontario in Thunder Bay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And did you get into writing when you were in school, or how did that happen?
I was a reader from the earliest I can remember. And reading and enjoying stories very quickly turns into wanting to write them. So I've always had that bug, that urge to do that and to be a storyteller. Yeah.
Is this the first attempt you've made at writing of this sort?
Well, I've played around writing fiction in the past. This is the longest work that I've done. And to say this is the first, I hope it doesn't suggest this is the first draft. Because
it doesn't read like a draft.
No, because it's the first novel I've finished, but this is probably the 16th or 17th full draft of this one. There's a lot of refining that went into it. Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because sometimes, when people talk about their work, it can sound easy to people, but when you're in that process, it's a very long process.
There's an American author who writes about writing and a lot of other topics. Her name's Anne Lamott, and she talks about giving yourself the freedom. I won't use her word, but she talks about having the freedom to write a crappy first draft, because if you wanted to get it perfect and poetic and beautiful on the page the first time, you'd never get past the first few words. So her advice is just to plow through and write the first draft, however it looks, and then you've got something to go back to and edit. And I'm with her on that. And I think that most writing is actually revising.
Absolutely.
Rewriting.
It is, truly. And I think a lot of writers, and I know in my world, a lot of journalists always say the best story is the one you've rewritten. And I think it's true. Yep.
And probably rewritten several times.
Yes, indeed. So tell me about the genesis of the book. What made you decide that you were finally going to do it?
Well, I was, we were living in Oakville, and our grown kids were both away on summer jobs. And my wife, who at the time was also a pastor, was on sabbatical, and she was out of town on a course. And I had the house and a lot of time to myself. And Sheridan College was offering a course in the art of the novel. And I got into the class and I found out I was the only one who wanted to write a mystery. And the teacher for the class was a woman who's written 17 mystery novels. So we clicked.
Wow.
She kind of adopted me, and that was my start. And I kind of say that the 10 weeks of her course, I kind of unearthed the bare bones of what would become a novel.
So the book is called The Book of Answers. How did you come up with the title?
Well, one of the things I learned in the novel writing class with this woman named Melody Campbell is if you like the genre, the mystery genre, and you think you may want to write more than one, maybe it's going to be a series. So it might make sense to set it up that way. So my protagonist in this book his name's Thomas Book, the Reverend Thomas Book. So this one's The Book of Answers. The one I'm working on right now is called The Book of Christmas Joy.
Oh, we'll talk about that in a minute.
That's a sequel. But so I have this in mind that each one will be called The Book of Something. And then a little deeper into it, in every novel that I've been thinking about writing, there's a literary device that there is a book in the story that becomes important. So it's a book about a guy named Book.
That's very cool. So give us a summary without giving everything away, and then we'll talk a little bit more about your characters.
A summary of the story?
Yeah.
Okay. So things open up when the video crew for a terrible reality show called The Ghost Toucher comes to this suburban church in Oakville, and they're there to hunt for the supposed church ghost. And the gimmick is they've brought with them a cadaver dog, testing the theory that cadaver dogs actually sniff out the spirit, not the flesh. So they begin this shoot, and the dog picks up something, and it turns out there actually is not a ghost, but a body in the basement of this church. And the somewhat hapless assistant pastor who had been given the kind of unwanted job of touring this video crew around and tolerating that, and being the guy who stands there and looks official on screen, gets himself wrapped up in a mystery of, okay, where did this body come from and why is it here? And another complication is that this all happens. Actually, it happens in Holy Week, which is where we are right now on the calendar.
Yes.
So he's got the complication of police showing up at the church and this pressure to get the church back in order before it's needed for Easter weekend. And all this happens while a blizzard has hit Oakville. So it's cold outside, and then traffic's not going well, and he has a young daughter who's trying to fly home for the holiday. So he's got things pulling him in all different kinds of directions. And the last thing he wanted was to be dealing with any of this. And it gets more and more complicated, because that's what you do when you write a mystery. You try to create a likable character, and then you make life terrible for him.
You have an impressive list of characters, 25 plus. And many people often ask if you've got more than 3 or 4 characters, how do you keep them all straight? Like, do you have a Bristol board with all the names and all the connections?
Oh, I absolutely. When I'm writing, I absolutely do, Veronique. And right now, while I'm working on the next one, I've had to make some hard choices about which characters from the first book get to show up in the second one. And then when I'm writing my sort of crappy first drafts of scenes that have these characters in them, I actually have to pick up the book and look and see, well, what did they look like?
Yeah.
And what were their mannerisms? What were the little tells I used to remind the reader of each character? Because I can't keep it all in my head.
No. It must be very difficult. And then also, it's what the connections are between the characters. Let's talk about some of those characters. I suppose we should start with the Rev. I love Father Brown. I've watched every episode. I think I binge watched about 8 years of it. And I know it's also, your character has been compared to Inspector Armand Gamache and I watched the Three Pines series. And so I was curious to see, because I read that on the back of your book before I actually read the book. And I thought, well, this should be cool. Did you have anybody in mind, or was there any sort of character that you liked, that you built the Rev on?
When I started, all I wanted to make sure I did was that I created a character that wouldn't be mistaken for me. and part of that was because I was as a minister working in the United Church and setting a murderer in the United Church in the community I worked in. I didn't want people to think, oh, he's writing about us, and if we're not dead yet, maybe he's plotting it. So I worked hard to build Tom to be someone who I could know a lot about, but who wasn't me. So I made him deliberately 15 years younger than me. I made him a widower. And he has one child, whereas I'm happily married and we're healthy and well, and we have 2 adult children. So I wanted there to be some distinctions. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it's fascinating. The character began to build itself. The character finds its own voice and its own character.
Did he take you to places you hadn't expected?
Yes, and one of them was I had when I sketched out what I thought he should be that would be different from me. One of the things I gave him was that his wife had died, and I didn't know what I was going to do with that, but making him a widower wasn't that big a step to then to make him someone who was still working on grief, and grief is one of the subtexts of the story, and people who've read it have commented on that grief is treated in hopefully in a fairly realistic way. I didn't know when I began that I would be doing that, I didn't. To do that, I had to delve into my own experiences of grief in life, but also 30 plus years working in ministry and meeting lots of folks who are grieving, who have faced loss and faced big changes in life, because grief isn't always about death. Right. It can be about losing a way of living or a place you used to live. So that's an underlying theme that came up that the character gave me. That I didn't start with. Characters
are sometimes really they become very interesting to you, don't they, as the writer? And so you hope that burst of interest that they caused in you will be translated to the reader. And it's very interesting. And were there things about your life that you actually brought into the character, things that you know?
Well, I mean, the fact that I set it in Oakville. And we were living in Oakville at the time. That meant that I could pretty much imagine the streets and the movement in the town without having to work too hard at it. And I wanted it to be true to the town and to the little part of town called Bronte Village, where most of the action happens. That's very close to where we used to live, so that was fun. I could bring that. Some of Tom's memories about earlier times in his ministry. One in particular, there was a story about him living in a manse. The church provided a house for the minister in New Brunswick. Yes. And he and his wife come home, and there's a meeting going on in the parlor. And that was about how, in some situations, the minister's house is pretty wide open. People come and go when they want to. That actually happened to me. But the way this character and his wife deal with it is very different from what I did. I just sort of put up with it and tried to be polite, where they very cleverly, one kept the meeting that was going on, kept the old gentleman busy, while the other one called a locksmith. And by the time they finished their meeting and they're out the door, the locks have already been changed. I mean, I thought of that, 30 plus years after it actually happened to me. I wish I'd been that smart at the time. So it was fun to take memories from my own life, but then write them the way I wish I did it.
Right. Yeah. Now, there was a very interesting relationship, I thought, between Father Tom and the character Michael. That was very interesting and clever. Tell us about it.
Well, Michael physically, the character, and in his mannerisms and voice is actually based on a friend who's a retired OPP officer, who never rose in rank as high as Michael did. But I borrowed this fella's physique and his way of being. Michael is called Michael because the patron saint of police officers is Michael.
Wow.
And I thought that was fun because in the book, Michael isn't there all the time. He kind of flits around and shows up when he's needed. And I think a couple times Tom refers to him as the guardian angel.
Yes.
And he has that kind of a little bit larger than life aspect to him. And that was deliberate.
And then, of course, there's the widower, and then the grief, and then love finds Father Tom, and Reverend Tom.
I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on that, but I wanted there to be. I mean, this is the story that's set in the week before Easter, and it begins just after a blizzard, and by the end of the week, There's a little bit of sunshine. Things are starting to warm up. So that's the physical setting. And I wanted for Tom, who's been in grief, to begin to see the possibilities of new life. Not a full-blown romance, but the possibility that it was okay even to think about it. Mm-hmm. So it's not very well developed. I didn't want it to be hokey.
And it wasn't. You it was very subtly handled, I thought, but it was very real. It was handled in a very real way.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. And then, of course, there was Attie. Mm-hmm. Did you like her?
She's actually based on a real person. And I've served in enough different congregations that I can just say that in one of the churches I served, there was somebody like her, a church matriarch who, in minister circles, we call them the church witch. Someone who kind of likes to control things. Her name, Attie, is based on a name from the Bible, Attaleia, who is actually one of the witches named in the Bible. So I just left it at that.
Yeah.
But there was one congregation I was in where one woman ran the show, and it happened that she didn't really care for me. Mm-hmm. So she had the capacity to make life really hard.
Yeah.
So in this book, young Reverend Tom turns the tables on her. And again, if I had been wise enough and smart enough way back then when I was at that church, maybe I could have done that.
Yeah.
It's really fun rewriting history.
Exactly. Do you have a favorite character?
Yeah, probably, well, two. One is Zeke the dog, Zeke the cadaver dog, who is absolutely essential to the story.
Yes.
He was probably the most fun to write. And the character the other one that I like the most is Tom's daughter, Hope. Mm-hmm. Who I, admittedly, in a lot of ways, based on our own daughter, the way she speaks and her forthrightness comes right from our daughter, and she's the one who's closest to my heart, and she literally represents hope in the story. And
good name too. And of course, you mentioned the device, the book, which is pretty important.
Yeah, in this one, the book is a journal that everyone had thought was long lost, and Tom happens upon it again in a kind of mysterious way, feels compelled to read it, and a journal from 20 plus years back in time gave me the device I needed to tell a backstory, and that it's always a challenge when you want to tell a lot of story to not dump a lot of information. So presenting it as a journal that Tom was having lots of fun reading because he was looking for himself in it, because it was written during a time when he was a student minister in the same congregation, I think gave me some space to tell stories about some of the characters that I would not have been able to deal with that in real time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was something when I was reading it, and I thought, look, I see what he's done. I saw that you had done exactly what you've just described, and I thought, I'm going to remember that. I think that's a clever device to tell a whole piece of another story that hinges on the main story. But as you say, you get to actually tell it without overwhelming the reader in the actual tale. So it was very clever.
It was also really fun to write in the voice of it's the caretaker who is long dead, but his journal is found. And writing in his voice was fun because I found that voice as I was writing. And old Doug has a lot to say about that church and that building and things that went on that he was part of. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned one of your favorite characters, Zeke. Mm-hmm. So why don't you, you said you really liked the beginning, so would you like to read some of it?
Sure.
Okay.
Zeke the cadaver dog raised his big head as if he just thought of a question. He paused his zigzag search pattern to turn and face me and his handler. His loud bark sent a shock through me, even though I'd watched him open his jaws to let loose with it. The producers of The Ghost Toucher claimed they were testing a theory that dogs like Zeke are guided by the spirits of the dead. Zeke and his handler were brought in to sniff out the ghost of St. Mungo's church. I thought it was a ploy to jazz up an otherwise boring location shoot. My assignment was to be the generic minister type in a dark suit and clerical collar who'd say to the camera, "I've heard the wild rumors, of course, but haven't seen anything like what you're looking for." That's the line I'd stick with if asked. I sure wouldn't tell him what I'd seen just before the dog barked.
And he goes on to find your story.
Yeah.
When you decided to have a dead body, did you have a church? Did you create that scene in the basement, or did you ever go to a basement where it was like that?
Well, there was a church I worked in years ago that had a room no one ever wanted to go in. And while I was there, they actually tried renovating it. And the oddest smells came out of it. And they renovated and they painted it, and no one would still use it. They just would stay away from it. So I found that fascinating, that the building had a history and was somehow keeping people away from that part of the building. And I never quite found out what that was about, but that idea stuck in my head. So when I decided to write a mystery, and when I decided to write a murder mystery set in a church in Oakville, I knew it couldn't be the one I worked in. So I went to the nearest neighboring church, which is Walton Memorial in Bronte Village in Oakville, and I visited with the minister and the staff. I said, "So here's what I want to do. Can I borrow your church and kill people in it?" And they said, "Well, that sounds great." And they offered me a list of who they'd like to
kill off.
They were very accommodating. They gave me a tour of the building and told me some stories about things that they couldn't explain that had gone on in the building, including at one time there were rumors of a ghost in that church building, and at another time there was actually somebody living in the belfry of the church. And I borrowed the idea of there being a ghost in the church. I borrowed there being somebody living in the belfry and built that into this story. And they gave me a book of the history of the church. They gave me a bunch of photographs to look at. So I didn't have to imagine the setting. I just used what was actually there. And then when the book came out, I was in touch with Walton Memorial in Oakville. I said, "So the book's out. You're in it. You're on the cover. That's actually Walton Memorial in Oakville." And we worked out an arrangement for the month of August. They promoted my book heavily amongst their friends and family. And every Sunday in church, the pastor held it up and said, and the deal I made with him was that for that month, half the proceeds from my sales were a donation back to the church. And I've done that with a few charities that matter to me as I've been selling the book. Being a minister, it's really hard to ask people for money. It's really hard to sell stuff.
Yes, it is.
But
whether you're a minister or not, I think writers find it very difficult to sell their own wares. But being able to say, this month, half the proceeds from this book are going to this cause I care about, made it a lot easier for me. And then along the way, I've been able to support some things I really care about. Yeah. So that's terrific.
Yeah.
And how are the folks in Oakville? Are they enjoying having this book about?
They've been so positive about it. And because we lived in Oakville for 18 years, lots of our friends have read it. Christmas time, people were approaching me. Can we buy some copies? And they were giving them out as gifts. Yeah, it's been quite encouraging.
Yeah. And you were a finalist for the Crime Writers of Canada award.
Yeah. So the same mentor that I took the Art of the Novel course with, Melody Campbell, said, "So you need to do two things, Darrow. First is you need to join the Crime Writers of Canada, which is an excellent organization. And then she said, you also need to send your manuscript in for consideration." And it was a finalist for their Award of Excellence for an unpublished manuscript. And that was quite exciting.
Yeah, I was in good
company. I got to go to an awards banquet at the Arts and Letters Society in Toronto, which is a gorgeous place. I got to meet some of the authors that I read, and it just opened up the possibility that I could do this.
That's fantastic. So I get the feeling that this is sort of going to go on a long time, and you've already said that it's going to be a series.
That's the plan. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever watch Father Brown?
I do like Father Brown, and I've read some of the original, the G.K. Chesterton novels. Yeah. The best compliment that I ever get from people is that I'm a good listener. And I think that characters like Father Brown, they pick up a lot by paying attention. And if you watch what's happening and you pay attention to people, their body language, their tone of voice, what they say and what they don't say tells you a lot.
Yes.
There's the parallels between a good cleric and an observant detective. They're there. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, congratulations. Where can people buy your book, by the way?
Well, you can get it at Biblioasis. You can get it at Storyteller's Bookstore on Ottawa Street. And it's also available at River Books. And on April 13th, there's a local authors showcase. Yeah. And there's about 8 of us that will have our books on sale April 13th from 1 to 3 at River Books. And it's also available on Amazon.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was great fun. And we'll be watching for the next one.
Thank you, Veronique.
Thank you. So a word to the wise, be careful when you go down to any old basement, because you never know, especially when you smell stuff. I can smell in my basement. And that's all for this edition of Scribes and Songsters. My thanks to our guest, Darrow Woods. A big thank you to our Scribes and Songsters team, producer Brian Sweet, technical producer and editor Gary Glass. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel for all 7 seasons of Scribes and Songsters. Grateful thanks to Tony Toldo and the Toldo Foundation, and to Neil and Tina Quiring for their ongoing support. We certainly appreciate it. Special thanks to you for watching. Hope to see you right back here next time on Scribes and Songsters. I'm Veronique Mandel. Bye for now.